A gunshot cracked the stillness of the Texas evening as Gideon Everett's weathered hand trembled over the small fortune spread before him. The year was 1874, and the rewards of his latest cattle drive to Kansas lay scattered across the rough-hewn table of his ranch house just outside Marfa, Texas. Blood trickled from his shoulder, a reminder that some debts couldn't be paid in dollars and cents. "Damn it all," he muttered, pressing a bandana to his wound while continuing to sort the bills with his good hand. The outlaw who'd ambushed him on the trail home had managed to graze him before Gideon put a bullet in the man's chest. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to separate him from his earnings, and it likely wouldn't be the last. At 32, Gideon had built something resembling prosperity in the harsh landscape of West Texas. His ranch, modest though it was, represented years of sweat and sacrifice. The money before him would buy more cattle, maybe even help expand the house dreams that kept him riding the dangerous trails year after year. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Few people ventured out to his isolated homestead, especially after nightfall. Gideon reached for his Colt revolver, wincing as the movement pulled at his injury. "Who's there?" he called, keeping his voice steady despite the pain. "Faith James," came a woman's voice, clear and determined. "I need to speak with you, Mr. Everett. It's about your children." Gideon froze. "Madam, you must be mistaken. I don't have any children." "Please open the door," she insisted. "I wouldn't ride out here alone at night if it wasn't important." Curiosity overpowering caution, Gideon tucked his revolver into his waistband and opened the door, keeping his body angled to draw, if needed. The woman standing on his porch was not what he expected. Her dress, though dusty from travel, was of fine quality. Honey brown hair was pinned neatly beneath a small hat, and her blue eyes met his with unwavering resolve. Behind her, a rented horse was tethered to his hitching post, looking nearly as exhausted as she did. "Miss James," he said, not moving from the doorway, "I think you've got the wrong man. Are you Gideon Everett?" When he nodded, she continued, "Then I have the right man. May I come in? It's been a long ride from El Paso." Gideon hesitated, then stepped aside. As she entered, her eyes widened at the sight of his bloodied shirt and the money spread across the table. "You're hurt," she said, setting down a small traveling bag. "It's nothing. Now, what's this about children?" Faith James drew a deep breath. "I was a friend of Sarah Mitchell's." The name hit Gideon like a physical blow. For years had passed since he'd last seen Sarah, a widow who'd owned a small boarding house in El Paso. They'd shared 6 months of happiness before his restless spirit had pulled him back to the open range. He'd written a few letters at first, but like so many things in his life, the connection had drifted away. "Sarah passed away 2 weeks ago," Faith said gently. "Typhoid fever." Gideon removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm sorry to hear that. Sarah was a good woman." "She was," Faith agreed, "and a good mother." The implication hung in the air between them. Gideon's throat went dry. "Mother, Sarah had twins shortly after you left. A boy and a girl. They're 3 years old now." Faith's gaze traveled to the money on the table. "She never told you. She said you had your own path to follow, and she didn't want to tie you down." "That's not possible," Gideon said automatically, though his mind was already calculating dates. "How can I know they're mine?" A flash of anger crossed Faith's face. "Because Sarah wasn't the type to lie, Mr. Everett. And because Thomas has your eyes, right down to that same green fleck in the left one." Gideon fell into a chair, his wounded shoulder forgotten. "Where are they now?" "At my home in El Paso, with my housekeeper. But I can't keep them. I'm moving east to Philadelphia next month to care for my ailing mother." Her eyes softened slightly. "Sarah named me their guardian in her will, but she left a letter saying you should have the chance to know your children, if you wanted them." "If I wanted them," Gideon repeated hollowly. Children. His children. A son and a daughter he'd never known existed. "Where are they going to go if not with you?" Faith asked plainly. "I don't know the first thing about raising children, Miss James. I'm gone for months at a time on cattle drives. This is no place for little ones." He gestured around the sparse one-room cabin. Faith's gaze fell on the money again. "Sarah always said you were working toward something, saving for something better." She nodded toward the bills. "Perhaps that something has found you instead." Gideon followed her eyes to his earnings payment for 16-hour days, sleeping in the dirt, and risking his life to get the herd to market. I was planning to expand the ranch, he said quietly. Buy more cattle in the spring. Money can wait, Faith said simply. Your kids can't. The words struck him with unexpected force. His kids couldn't wait. They needed a father now, not when it was convenient, not when his dreams of prosperity were realized. A family he hadn't known existed was suddenly his responsibility. Faith watched him struggle with the realization. I can take them to an orphanage in San Antonio. They'd likely be separated, but no. Gideon interrupted, more forcefully than he'd intended. The thought of his children, Sarah's children, in an orphanage was unbearable. No orphanage. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the vast Texas landscape that had been his only companion for so long. The painful truth was that he'd loved Sarah, in his way. Not enough to stay, perhaps, but enough that the news of her death left an ache in his chest. What are their names? He asked, his back still to Faith. Thomas and Elizabeth, though she goes by Lizzie. Thomas and Lizzie, he repeated, testing the names on his tongue. And they're healthy? They are. They're bright, too. Sarah taught them their letters already. Gideon turned back to face Faith. I can't ride to El Paso tonight. Not with this shoulder. I wouldn't ask you to. I've taken a room at the hotel in Marfa for the night. I can bring them here in 3 days' time. She paused. If that's what you decide. Decision. As if he had any real choice in the matter. What kind of man would turn his back on his own flesh and blood? I'll be ready, Gideon said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Bring them here. Faith's shoulders relaxed slightly. Sarah hoped you would say that. She spoke well of you, even after you left. Guilt twisted inside him. I'm not the man she knew. Not sure I'm fit to raise children. Few people are ready for parenthood, Mr. Everett. Even those who plan for it. Faith reached into her bag and withdrew a small daguerreotype, which she placed on the table beside his money. This was taken last Christmas. Gideon picked up the image with trembling fingers. 2 small faces stared back at him. The boy had Sarah's gentle smile, but Gideon's own unruly dark hair. The girl was all Sarah's delicate features and a determined set to her chin that brought a painful surge of memory. They have her kindness, Faith said softly, and they deserve a chance to know their father. Gideon couldn't look away from the image. These were his children, his family, something he'd never thought to have. I'll need supplies, he said, thinking aloud. Proper beds. Food they'll eat. Children need more than things, Mr. Everett. He glanced up at her, a flash of irritation crossing his features. I know that. I'm just saying there's work to be done before they arrive. Faith nodded. Yes, there is. She reached for her bag. I should get back to town before it grows any later. It's dangerous riding alone, Gideon said automatically. I'd escort you, but he gestured to his shoulder. I've managed this far, she said with a small smile. I'll see you in 3 days, Mr. Everett. With your children. After she left, Gideon sat for a long while staring at the daguerreotype and the pile of money. For the first time, the bills seemed meaningless compared to the faces looking back at him from the photograph. With newfound purpose, he swept the money into a lockbox and began to plan. 3 days wasn't much time, but he would make it work. He had to. Morning light brought clarity and an ache in Gideon's wounded shoulder. The doctor in Marfa confirmed it was just a graze, cleaned and bandaged it properly, then sent him on his way with instructions to rest, advice Gideon promptly ignored. The town was small but growing, with a general store that carried most necessities. Gideon found himself standing bewildered in front of shelves of children's clothing, unsure of what sizes 3-year-olds would wear. Can I help you find something, Mr. Everett? Asked Martha Wilson, the storekeeper's wife. Need clothes for children. Boy and girl, both 3. Martha's eyebrows rose in surprise. Gideon rarely came to town except for supplies, and he certainly had never purchased children's items before. Special occasion? She asked, already pulling items from shelves. They're coming to live with me, he said simply, not elaborating further. Martha, a kind woman who'd raised 6 children of her own, didn't press. Instead, she efficiently gathered clothing, shoes, and other essentials, occasionally asking practical questions that Gideon hadn't considered. They'll need bedding, of course. And have you thought about toys? Books? Children need stimulation. She paused, noting his overwhelmed expression. Perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. No, Gideon said firmly. They should have those things. Whatever they need. By the time he left the store, His wallet was considerably lighter and his wagon filled with packages. Martha had promised to send her eldest son out with a small bed frame and mattress the next day. Next, Gideon visited the lumber yard. If he was going to house 2 children, his one-room cabin wouldn't suffice. He purchased enough materials to add 2 small bedrooms onto the back of the house, ignoring the owner's skepticism about completing such a project in just 2 days. "I'll manage," Gideon insisted, paying for the delivery. The final stop was at the home of Miguel Vasquez, who occasionally helped with ranch work. Miguel had 5 children of his own and would understand what Gideon was facing. The Vasquez home was modest but warm and inviting. Children's laughter spilled from the yard as Gideon approached. Miguel greeted him with surprise. "Gideon, we don't often see you in town 2 days running." Briefly, Gideon explained the situation. Miguel's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "So you need help building rooms before these children arrive?" "Of course. My boys and I will come tomorrow at dawn." He paused. "But Gideon, a house is just walls. Are you ready for what it means to be a father?" "I don't have much choice," Gideon replied honestly. Miguel's wife, Elena, emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. After hearing the story, she immediately began making plans. "The children will need proper meals, not just whatever you cook over a fire on the range," she insisted. "I'll send Rosalinda to help. She's 16 and good with little ones." Gideon tried to protest, but Elena waved him off. "A few hours each day, to cook and help with the children while you work. You cannot do everything alone." By the time he left the Vasquez home, Gideon had more help than he'd expected and a dinner invitation for the following evening. "Bring the children when they arrive," Elena insisted. "They should know there are other little ones nearby." The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Miguel and his sons proved to be skilled carpenters, and the addition to Gideon's cabin took shape quickly. They built 2 small bedrooms and expanded the main living area, creating a proper home where once there had been just a bachelor's shelter. Women from neighboring homesteads, hearing of Gideon's situation through Martha Wilson's discreet inquiries, arrived with quilts, preserved fruits, and advice, much of it contradictory, but all well-intentioned. "Children need routine," advised Mrs. Davenport, a schoolteacher's wife. "Let them run free while they're young," countered Mrs. Peterson, mother of 4 rambunctious boys. Gideon listened politely, tucking away the suggestions that made sense and diplomatically ignoring the rest. By the evening of the 3rd day, the house was ready. 2 small bedrooms furnished with beds, chests for clothing, and even a rocking chair that Mrs. Wilson insisted was essential for bedtime stories. The main room now boasted a proper dining table with 4 chairs, shelves for books and toys, and curtains at the windows that softened the harsh lines of the cabin. Gideon stood in the doorway, surveying the transformation. The place barely resembled the sparse shelter where he'd spent the past 4 years. It looked like a home, now something he hadn't realized he wanted until it materialized around him. As dusk approached, Gideon paced the porch, watching the road for any sign of travelers. Faith had said 3 days, but she hadn't specified a time. What if something had happened? What if she'd changed her mind about bringing the children to him? What if the children didn't want to come? That thought struck him with unexpected force. He'd been so focused on preparing the house that he hadn't considered how Thomas and Lizzie might feel about being brought to live with a stranger who happened to be their father. The sound of wagon wheels interrupted his anxious thoughts. A small covered wagon appeared on the horizon, moving steadily toward the ranch. Gideon's heart began to pound as he recognized Faith James at the reins. He stood frozen on the porch as the wagon approached, unable to move forward or retreat. Faith brought the horses to a stop and set the brake. For a moment, she just looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Are you ready, Mr. Everett?" she called. Was he? Could anyone be ready for such a moment? But he nodded and stepped forward as Faith turned to speak softly to someone inside the wagon. A small face peered out from behind the canvas. Dark hair, serious eyes, his son, Thomas. The boy stared at Gideon with open curiosity, but made no move to emerge. "It's all right," Faith encouraged, helping the child climb down. "This is your papa." Thomas stood beside the wagon, one hand clutching a small wooden horse, the other holding his sister's hand as Faith helped her down. Lizzie was smaller than her brother, with Sarah's delicate features and light brown curls tied with a ribbon that had come loose during the journey. The children stood together, leaning against each other for support as they stared at Gideon with wide, uncertain eyes. He wanted to rush forward, to sweep them into his arms, but instinct told him to move slowly. Instead, he crouched down to their level, keeping a respectful distance. "Hello, Thomas." "Hello, Lizzie." He faltered. What should they call him? "I'm your pa." Thomas studied him intently. "Mama said our pa lived far away." I do. But this is your home now, too." Gideon gestured to the cabin behind him. "Would you like to see inside? I have rooms ready for you." Lizzie looked up at Faith, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on, sweetheart. I'll bring your things." Slowly, the children approached, still holding hands. Gideon resisted the urge to touch them, to confirm they were real. Instead, he stood and led the way inside, watching as they took in their new surroundings. "That door leads to your room, Thomas," he said, pointing. "And that one is yours, Lizzie. You each have your own bed and a place for your clothes and toys." The children peeked into their rooms, their faces lighting up at the sight of the new beds with colorful quilts and small wooden toys placed carefully on the pillows. "Are these for us?" Lizzie asked in a small voice. "Yes," Gideon confirmed. "All of this is for you." Faith entered with 2 small trunks, which she set down in the main room. Sarah packed their favorite things, she explained. Clothes, books, a few toys. While the children explored their rooms, Faith pulled Gideon aside. "They've been prepared for this as much as possible," she said quietly. "I've told them about you, shown them the few letters you sent Sarah. But they're still very young, and they've just lost their mother." "I understand," Gideon said, though in truth, he wasn't sure he did. How could he possibly fill the void left by Sarah's death? What did he know about comforting children? "They'll need patience," Faith continued, "and consistency. Routine helps children feel secure." "I've received plenty of advice these past days," Gideon said wryly. "Seems raising children is something everyone has opinions on." Faith smiled slightly. "True enough, but you'll find your own way." She glanced at the transformed cabin. "You've made a good start." A small crash from one of the bedrooms drew their attention. Gideon rushed to find Thomas standing beside a toppled chair, looking horrified. "I just wanted to see out the window," the boy said, his lower lip trembling. Gideon carefully righted the chair. "No harm done," he said gently. "Next time, ask for help if you need it." Thomas nodded solemnly, relief evident in his expression. Gideon realized with a start that the boy had expected to be punished. What kind of father did these children think he would be? "Are you hungry?" he asked, changing the subject. Mrs. Vasquez sent over a stew for dinner. The mention of food brought both children back to the main room. Faith helped get them settled at the table while Gideon warmed the stew over the fire. The domestic scene felt surreal, his home filled with voices other than his own, the need to care for others beyond himself. After dinner, Faith helped the children prepare for bed, showing Gideon the routines they were accustomed to. Lizzie needed her hair brushed exactly 20 times. Thomas had a prayer he said each night, taught to him by Sarah. Both children had small cloth dolls they slept with, well-worn and obviously cherished. "Mama made them," Lizzie explained, clutching her doll to her chest. When the children were tucked in, Faith announced that she would return to town for the night. "I'll come back tomorrow before I leave for El Paso," she promised, "to make sure everyone is settling in." Panic flashed through Gideon. "You're leaving so soon? I told you I'm needed in Philadelphia," she reminded him gently. "And they're your children, Mr. Everett." After Faith departed, Gideon found himself alone with the sleeping children. He checked on them repeatedly during the night, marveling at their peaceful faces, the rise and fall of their small chests as they breathed. His children. The reality of it was beginning to sink in, bringing with it both wonder and terror. What did he know about raising children? His own father had been a hard man, quick with criticism and sparse with affection. Gideon had left home at 16, determined to make his own way and never look back. Now he had the chance to be different, to be the father these children deserved. The thought was both daunting and strangely exhilarating. Morning brought new challenges. The children woke early, confused about where they were until memory returned. Lizzie cried for her mother, a heartbreaking sound that left Gideon feeling helpless. Thomas tried to comfort his sister, displaying a maturity beyond his years. Mama's with the angels now, he told her solemnly. Remember what Miss Faith said? We have to be brave. Gideon prepared breakfast, grateful for the provisions Elena Vasquez had sent over. The children ate quietly, stealing glances at him when they thought he wasn't looking. What do we call you? Thomas asked suddenly. Gideon paused. What would you like to call me? The children exchanged looks. Miss Faith said you're our Pa. Lizzie said cautiously. I am, Gideon confirmed. You can call me Pa, if you'd like. Thomas nodded seriously. Mama had a picture of you. She said you were working far away, but that you loved us. The simple statement hit Gideon like a physical blow. Sarah had told them he loved them, even though he'd never known of their existence. She'd created a father for them out of her own kindness, sparing them the knowledge that he had left without a backward glance. Your mama was right, Gideon said, his throat tight. I do love you, and I'm very glad you're here now. After breakfast, Faith returned as promised. She spent the morning helping the children settle in, showing Gideon how to manage the practical aspects of childcare. He'd never considered how to bathe them properly, how to comb Lizzie's tangles without tears, how to coax Thomas out of his occasional stubborn silences. You're doing well, she assured him when the children were occupied with their toys. Better than many would in your situation. I'm terrified, Gideon admitted. What if I fail them? Faith considered this. The fact that you're worried about failing suggests you won't. The worst fathers are those who never question their abilities. She paused. You've created a home for them in 3 days. That shows commitment. It's not enough. No, she agreed. But it's a beginning. She glanced at the children. They need love, security, and patience. The rest you'll figure out as you go. When it came time for Faith to leave, the children grew anxious. She had been their constant companion since their mother's death, a bridge between their old life and this new, uncertain one. Will you come back? Lizzie asked, clinging to Faith's skirts. I'll write to you. Faith promised, kneeling to embrace each child. And you can write to me when you learn how. Your pa will help you. She turned to Gideon. There's a letter from Sarah in Thomas's trunk. She wrote it when she knew she was dying. It's for you. Gideon nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Faith's departure left a palpable void. The children watched her wagon disappear down the road, their small shoulders slumped with yet another loss. Shall we visit the horses? Gideon suggested, desperate to distract them. I have a gentle mare you might like to meet. The suggestion worked better than he'd expected. Both children loved animals, and the ranch provided plenty of distractions. By afternoon, Thomas was following Gideon around the barn, asking endless questions about the horses and cattle, while Lizzie had discovered a litter of kittens in the hayloft and was completely enchanted. That evening, Elena Vasquez's daughter Rosalinda arrived to help with dinner. She was a cheerful girl who quickly won the children's trust, teaching them a clapping game that had Lizzie giggling for the first time since their arrival. After the children were asleep, Gideon retrieved the letter Faith had mentioned. The envelope was addressed to him in Sarah's neat handwriting. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and began to read. Dearest Gideon, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and our children have come to you. I hope you will forgive me for keeping their existence a secret. It was not done out of malice, but from understanding the man you are. You were not ready for family life when we met, and I loved you too much to try to change your nature. Thomas and Elizabeth are the greatest joy of my life, and each day I see pieces of you in them. Thomas has your determination and sense of adventure. Lizzie has your gentle heart, though you may not recognize that quality in yourself. I have told them that their father is a good man working far away. They know your name and that you love them. I hope that in time, these things will become true in more than just words. I do not ask that you change your life completely. I only ask that you give them the chance to know you, and yourself the chance to know them. They are remarkable children, Gideon, and they deserve a father's love. Whatever choices you make, know that I have never regretted our time together. You gave me 2 precious gifts, and for that, I will always be grateful. With love, Sarah. Gideon read the letter twice more, tears streaming unchecked down his face. Sarah had known him better than he knew himself. She had given him the freedom he thought he wanted, at great cost to herself. And now, even in death, she was giving him a chance at the family he hadn't known he needed. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his strongbox alongside the daguerreotype. Then he checked on the children one last time before settling into his own bed, mind racing with plans and possibilities. The days that followed established a tentative routine. Rosalinda came each morning to help with breakfast and stayed until after the midday meal. Gideon adjusted his ranch work to stay closer to the house, bringing the children with him when possible, arranging for their care when not. Thomas took to ranch life with enthusiasm, proud to help with small chores and fascinated by the livestock. Lizzie was more reserved, but found joy in the domestic arts Rosalinda taught her and in tending to her beloved kittens. There were difficult moments. Both children had nightmares and would wake crying for their mother. Lizzie sometimes refused to speak for hours when overcome by grief. Thomas would occasionally lash out in frustration, his 3-year-old emotions too complex for his limited vocabulary. Gideon learned patience he didn't know he possessed. He discovered that a gentle voice worked better than a firm one, that consistency mattered more than strictness, and that sometimes the best response was simply to hold a crying child until the storm passed. One evening, about 2 weeks after the children's arrival, Gideon sat on the porch watching them play in the yard. Thomas was building an elaborate fort from sticks, while Lizzie arranged her dolls in a tea party nearby. The sight filled him with an unfamiliar warmth. These were his children, his family. For the first time since they'd arrived, the reality of it settled into his bones with absolute certainty. He would do anything for them, be anything they needed. "Pa, look," Thomas called, proudly displaying his creation. "That's fine work, son," Gideon called back, the word son feeling right on his tongue. "Will you come to our tea party?" Lizzie asked, her small face earnest. "We have room for you." Gideon hesitated only briefly before joining her on the ground, awkwardly accepting a tiny cup from her outstretched hand. "Thank you, darling." "You have to hold out your pinky," she instructed seriously, demonstrating with her own small finger. "That's what Mama taught me." Gideon complied, earning a radiant smile that transformed her solemn little face. In that moment, he would have balanced a teacup on his nose if it meant seeing that smile again. Later that night, after tucking the children into bed, Gideon returned to the main room and noticed the strongbox where he kept his cattle drive earnings. He hadn't thought about the money since the children arrived. Opening the box, he counted the bills enough to expand the herd significantly, as he'd planned. Instead, he found himself making different calculations. The cost of proper education for 2 children, clothing that would need replacing as they grew, a larger house, eventually, perhaps a piano for Lizzie, who hummed constantly, and proper riding lessons for Thomas, who was already showing an affinity for horsemanship. The money represented freedom once. Now it represented security for his family, a different kind of wealth altogether. A soft sound from the children's room caught his attention. Lizzie stood in the doorway, clutching her doll. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. Gideon closed the box and went to her, lifting her easily into his arms. "Want to tell me about it?" She shook her head, burying her face against his shoulder. "That's all right. Sometimes dreams just need to be left behind." He carried her back to her bed and sat on the edge, still holding her. "Would a story help?" She nodded, her small body relaxing against him. Gideon began a tale his own mother had told him long ago, about a brave little girl who befriended a wild horse. He embellished freely, making the horse talk and the little girl perform impossible feats of bravery, until Lizzie was giggling despite her earlier fears. "Is that a real story?" she asked when he finished. "Parts of it," he admitted. "The best stories usually have some truth in them. Mama told good stories." Her voice grew quiet. "I miss her." "I know you do, darling. Your mama was a wonderful woman." Gideon stroked her hair gently. "She loved you and Thomas very much." "Did she love you too?" The innocent question caught him off guard. "Yes," he said after a moment. "And I loved her in my way." Lizzie seemed satisfied with this answer. "Will you stay with us forever, Pa?" "Yes," Gideon promised, the word a solemn vow. "I'll be right here whenever you need me. Now and always." When she finally drifted back to sleep, Gideon remained beside her, watching her peaceful face in the moonlight that streamed through the window. The future he had planned: endless cattle drives, expanding his ranch into an empire, perhaps even moving on to new territories, seemed hollow compared to the life taking shape around him now. Faith James's words echoed in his mind. "Money can wait. Your kids can't." She had been right. Some treasures couldn't be counted in dollars and cents, and some investments yielded returns that had nothing to do with cattle or land. The real fortune had found him when he least expected it, in the form of two small children who now depended on him for everything. As autumn progressed into winter, the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The addition to the cabin proved inadequate for their growing needs, so Gideon hired Miguel and his sons to build a proper house adjacent to the original structure. By Christmas, they had moved into a spacious four-bedroom home with a large kitchen, a sitting room where Lizzie's promised piano would eventually stand, and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. The children thrived under Gideon's care, growing stronger and more confident as the weeks passed. Their grief for their mother remained, manifesting in quiet moments and occasional tears, but it no longer dominated their days. They began to look forward rather than back, to see themselves as part of a family that, while different from before, was solid and loving. Gideon changed too. The restlessness that had driven him for years subsided, replaced by a deep satisfaction in watching his children grow. He still worked hard, the ranch demanded it, but his priorities shifted. The cattle drives to Kansas were delegated to trusted hands while he remained closer to home. The money saved for expansion went instead to improvements that benefited the family: better furniture, educational materials, a pony for Thomas's 4th birthday. Word spread throughout Marfa about the bachelor rancher who'd unexpectedly become a devoted father. Some viewed the transformation with skepticism, others with admiration. Most offered support in various forms: hand-me-down clothing, invitations to social gatherings, offers to include the children in the informal schooling that took place at the Peterson home until Marfa could build a proper school. Christmas that year was a revelation. Gideon had never been one for holidays, typically spending them alone or with whatever crew happened to be working the ranch. But Thomas and Lizzie approached the season with such wonder that he found himself caught up in their excitement. Together, they ventured into the foothills to cut a pine tree, which they decorated with strings of dried berries, paper stars the children made under Rosalinda's guidance, and a few precious glass ornaments ordered from a catalog. Gideon spent evenings carving wooden toys for their gifts: a miniature ranch set for Thomas, a dollhouse for Lizzie, while the children slept. On Christmas morning, watching their faces as they discovered their presents, Gideon experienced a joy so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. This, he realized, was what Sarah had wanted for him all along: not just the responsibility of fatherhood, but the profound happiness it could bring. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came new beginnings. Gideon hired a proper tutor for the children, a young woman named Grace Hamilton who had moved to Marfa to be near her brother after the death of her husband. Miss Hamilton was soft-spoken but firm, with innovative ideas about education that impressed Gideon from their first meeting. Children learn best through experience, she explained, outlining her plans to use the ranch itself as a classroom. Thomas and Elizabeth will learn arithmetic by helping with the accounts, geography by mapping the ranch boundaries, biology by observing the livestock and wildlife. That's not how schooling was done in my day, Gideon remarked dubiously. Miss Hamilton smiled. Perhaps that's why you left school at 12, Mr. Everett. He had to concede the point. His own education had been a dreary affair of rote memorization and strict discipline that had left him with a distaste for learning. He wanted better for his children. Under Miss Hamilton's guidance, Thomas and Lizzie flourished. Their natural curiosity found direction, and their different talents were nurtured rather than forced into conventional paths. Thomas showed an aptitude for practical matters: building, repairing, understanding how things worked. Lizzie revealed a creative spirit that expressed itself in stories, songs, and remarkably detailed drawings of the world around her. As spring turned to summer, another change came to the Everett household. Faith James returned to Texas, her mother having passed away peacefully in Philadelphia. Her first visit to the ranch left her astonished at the transformation both of the property and of Gideon himself. I hardly recognized the place, she marveled, taking in the new house, the flourishing garden, and the comfortable domesticity that had replaced the Spartan bachelor existence of a year before. I hardly recognize myself sometimes, Gideon admitted as they watched the children playing with their tutor in the yard. But it's a good change. Faith studied him thoughtfully. Sarah would be proud, you know. This is what she hoped for. I wish she could see them, Gideon said quietly. They're growing so fast, changing every day. Thomas is nearly as tall as Lizzie now, though she's still the boss of him. They have her spirit, Faith agreed, and more of you than you might realize. During her visit, Faith stayed in town, but she spent most days at the ranch. The children were overjoyed to see her, peppering her with stories of their new life and proudly showing off their accomplishments. "Miss Faith, I can ride my pony all by myself now," Thomas announced importantly. "Pa says I'm a natural horseman. And I can play Twinkle, Twinkle on the piano," Lizzie added, not to be outdone. "Miss Hamilton is teaching me." Faith absorbed their chatter with genuine interest, answering their questions about Philadelphia and bringing gifts that showed she'd remembered their preferences: a book about horses for Thomas, a set of colored pencils for Lizzie. Gideon watched these interactions with growing awareness of Faith herself. In the years since their first meeting, she had been a constant presence in his thoughts, though always connected to the children rather than standing as a woman in her own right. Now, seeing her with Thomas and Lizzie, noting her intelligence, her kindness, and yes, her beauty, he found himself noticing things he'd been too overwhelmed to see before. The way sunlight caught the gold highlights in her hair, the graceful movement of her hands as she spoke, the quiet strength that had brought her alone across Texas to ensure his children had a father. Faith, for her part, seemed unaware of his attention. She had returned to Texas to settle her affairs before deciding on her next steps. Philadelphia had never been her home, merely a duty to be fulfilled. Now she was free to choose her path. "I'm considering staying in Marfa," she mentioned one evening as they sat on the porch after the children were in bed. "The town is growing. They need a proper school, and I have experience teaching." "That would please the children," Gideon said carefully. "They've missed you." Faith smiled. "And I've missed them. More than I expected." She paused. "It's remarkable what you've accomplished here, Gideon. You've become the father they deserve." "I'm still learning," he admitted. "Every day brings new challenges." "That's parenthood," she said with a laugh. "It never gets simpler, just different." The conversation drifted to other topics: Faith's time in Philadelphia, the changes in Marfa, the progress of the ranch. As the evening deepened, Gideon found himself reluctant to see it end. "Will you join us for the Independence Day celebration?" he asked as she prepared to leave. "The town's planning quite an event this year. Fireworks, dancing, a proper picnic." Faith hesitated. "I wouldn't want to intrude on your family time." "You could never intrude," Gideon said, more forcefully than he'd intended. "You're part of their lives, important to them, and to you." The question hung in the air between them, unexpected and revealing. Gideon met her gaze steadily. "Yes, to me as well." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "Then yes, I'd be happy to join you." The 4th of July celebration was the social event of the summer in Marfa. The entire town gathered in the central square, where tables groaned under the weight of potluck offerings. Musicians played lively tunes, and children ran wild with sparklers as the day faded into evening. Gideon arrived with Thomas and Lizzie, both dressed in their finest clothes and vibrating with excitement. They found Faith waiting near the bandstand, lovely in a blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair arranged more elaborately than usual. "Miss Faith," Lizzie cried, rushing forward for an embrace. "You look like a princess." "Thank you, sweetheart. You look very pretty yourself." Faith smoothed the girl's curls, which were already escaping their ribbons. "And Thomas, so handsome in your new shirt." Thomas blushed, but stood a little straighter at the compliment. The evening unfolded in a whirl of activity. There was food to sample, games to play, neighbors to greet. The children darted from one attraction to another, with Gideon and Faith following at a more sedate pace. As darkness fell and the fireworks began, the four of them found a quiet spot on a blanket spread on the grass. Thomas and Lizzie watched the display with wonder, their faces illuminated by the colorful bursts overhead. "This is the best day ever," Lizzie declared, leaning against Faith's side. "The very best," Thomas agreed, his head on Gideon's shoulder. Faith met Gideon's eyes over the children's heads, a smile of shared happiness passing between them. In that moment, they felt like a family, not just Gideon and his children, but Faith too, connected by more than just the circumstances that had brought them together. When the music began again after the fireworks, Thomas and Lizzie begged to stay for the dancing. "Just one song," Gideon conceded, knowing full well it would never be just one. You should dance too, Pa, Lizzie suggested innocently. With Miss Faith. Faith laughed, though her cheeks colored slightly. Your father probably has better things to do, Lizzie. Nothing better, Gideon said, offering his hand. If you do me the honor. The dance was a simple waltz, one Gideon knew only passably well. But Faith followed his lead gracefully, her hand warm in his, her face tilted up to meet his gaze. You've been practicing, she observed as he guided her through a turn without mishap. Mrs. Peterson has been giving lessons to several of us ranchmen, Gideon admitted. Says we're an embarrassment to the county at social functions. Faith laughed, the sound warming him more than the summer night. Well, her efforts weren't wasted. As they moved together, Gideon found himself thinking of Sarah's letter. She had known him better than he knew himself, had seen the man he could become before he'd glimpsed that possibility. Would she approve of these new feelings stirring within him? This attraction to the woman who had brought his children to him? Somehow he thought she would. Sarah had wanted happiness for all of them, himself included. You're miles away, Faith observed, bringing him back to the present. Just thinking about how life changes, Gideon said honestly. A year ago, I was alone, counting bills from a cattle drive and planning the next one. Now you have a family, she finished for him. Yes. He held her gaze. And maybe the possibility of something more? The question hung between them, hopeful and uncertain. Faith's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. Perhaps, she said softly. If we're patient, if we're sure. It was enough for now. The dance ended, and they returned to the children, who were drooping with exhaustion despite their protests that they weren't tired at all. The days that followed brought Faith more frequently to the ranch. Initially, her visits were framed as assistance with the children or consultations about their education. But gradually, the pretenses fell away, and she came simply to be with them, all of them. Gideon found in Faith a companion whose company he genuinely enjoyed. She was intelligent, well-read, and possessed a quiet humor that surfaced unexpectedly in their conversations. Unlike many women of his acquaintance, she didn't shy away from discussing substantive matters: politics, ranch management, the future of the growing Texas communities. More importantly, she understood his devotion to his children without feeling threatened by it. She respected the place Sarah held in their lives, asking questions about her and encouraging the children to share memories of their mother. As summer waned, Faith accepted a position teaching at the newly established Marfa School. Her days were filled with classrooms and lessons, but her evenings and weekends increasingly centered on the Everett Ranch. The children accepted this development with uncomplicated happiness. To them, Miss Faith's presence was a natural extension of their family circle. They didn't question the way Gideon's eyes followed her across a room or how their hands sometimes lingered when passing a dish at dinner. But Gideon questioned himself constantly. Was it too soon? Were his feelings genuine or merely gratitude for the woman who had brought his children to him? What would people think, what would his children think if he began courting Faith less than a year after learning he was a father? The answers came unexpectedly one September evening. Faith had joined them for dinner, as had become customary on Fridays. Afterward, while she helped Lizzie with a particularly difficult piano piece, Gideon and Thomas sat on the porch repairing a bridle. Pa, Thomas said suddenly, looking up from his work, do you love Miss Faith? The directness of the question startled Gideon into honesty. I believe I do, son. Would that bother you? Thomas considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important matters. No, she makes you smile, and she knows how to fix Lizzie's hair better than you do. Gideon chuckled. That's certainly true. Mama would like her, Thomas added confidently. She always said you needed someone to look after you. Did she now? Gideon was constantly surprised by the things Sarah had told the children about him, creating a presence in their lives even during his absence. Thomas nodded solemnly. She said you were too busy looking at the horizon to see what was right in front of you. The insight struck Gideon forcefully. It was exactly what he had done, focused on distant goals while missing the immediate joys and connections that made life meaningful. Your mama was a wise woman, he said finally. I'm only just learning how wise. That night, after the children were asleep and Faith was preparing to return to town, Gideon walked her to her buggy. I'd like to court you properly, he said without preamble. If you're amenable. Faith's expression in the lantern light was a mixture of surprise and something softer. Are you certain? It's been a year of enormous change for you. I've never been more certain of anything, Gideon replied. Except perhaps that my children are the greatest blessing of my life. They are remarkable, Faith agreed. A credit to both their parents. I want you to know that Sarah will always be their mother, Gideon said carefully. I would never try to replace her. Faith interrupted gently. That's not what courting means, at least not to me. Relief washed through him. Then what does it mean to you? Faith considered this. It means discovering if what we feel for each other can grow into something lasting. It means building something new that honors what came before without being constrained by it. She smiled. It means seeing if there's room in your family for one more heart. Gideon took her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping her smaller ones. There's room, he said simply. There has been from the beginning, I think. Their courtship progressed with deliberate care. Gideon arranged for proper outings, dinners at the hotel restaurant in Marfa, attendance at church socials, chaperoned rides across the ranch lands. But the most meaningful moments came in the everyday interactions. Faith helping Thomas with his reading, Gideon attending school events where Faith students performed recitations, all four of them working together to prepare the garden for winter planting. By Christmas, the nature of their relationship was obvious to everyone in Marfa. The children accepted it with equanimity, secure in the knowledge that their father's affection for Faith didn't diminish his love for them or their mother's memory. On Christmas Eve, after a joyful celebration with the children, Gideon asked Faith to remain behind when they went to bed. They sat before the fire, the room illuminated only by the flames and the lights of the Christmas tree. I have something for you, Gideon said, producing a small box. It's not meant to rush you, only to let you know my intentions. Faith opened the box to find a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was my grandmother's, Gideon explained. My mother gave it to me before she died, said I should save it for when I found someone worth spending my life with. Faith touched the ring gently, but didn't remove it from the box. Are you asking me to marry you, Gideon? I'm asking if that's a path you might consider, he clarified. When we're both ready. When the children are ready. She studied him in the firelight, her expression thoughtful. You're not the same man who sat counting bills a year ago. No, he agreed. That man couldn't see beyond his next cattle drive. He didn't understand what real wealth looked like. And now, Gideon gestured to the comfortable home around them, to the handmade decorations the children had created, to the woman sitting beside him. Now I know that the richest man isn't the one with the most money, but the one surrounded by love, by family. Faith closed the box carefully and handed it back to him. Ask me again in the spring, she said softly. Not because I doubt your feelings or mine, but because some decisions shouldn't be made in the emotional glow of Christmas. Though disappointed, Gideon respected her wisdom. Spring it is, then. Winter passed with its own rhythms and challenges. A particularly harsh cold snap in January tested the ranch's preparations, keeping Gideon busy ensuring the livestock survived. February brought influenza to Marfa, closing the school temporarily and confining Faith to her small house in town for weeks. Gideon worried constantly, sending supplies and checking on her from a distance until the doctor confirmed she was no longer contagious. When she finally returned to the ranch, thin and tired but recovering, the children greeted her with carefully drawn get-well cards and a barrage of stories about everything she'd missed. Never been so glad to hear Lizzie's chatter, Faith confessed to Gideon later. Being alone with fever gives one too much time to think. And what did you think about? He asked, pouring her a cup of the herbal tea the doctor had recommended. Life. Death. What matters most? She accepted the tea with a grateful smile. I thought about Sarah, actually. About how fleeting our time can be, and how important it is not to waste it. March brought the first signs of spring green shoots pushing through the soil, wildflowers dotting the hillsides, longer days filled with sunshine and possibility. The ranch came alive with activity as calving season began, keeping Gideon and his hands busy around the clock. Despite his exhaustion, Gideon made time each evening for his family. He listened to Lizzie practice her piano lessons, helped Thomas with the model ranch they were building together, and continued the bedtime story ritual that had become sacred to all of them. Faith often joined these evening gatherings, adding her own talents to the mix. She taught the children songs from her childhood, introduced them to classic literature through dramatic readings, and showed a surprising skill for sketching that delighted Lizzie particularly. On the first truly warm evening in April, Gideon suggested a picnic by the stream that ran through the eastern edge of his property. The children raced ahead, eager to explore after a winter mostly confined to the house and barn. "They've grown so much this year," Faith observed as she and Gideon followed at a more leisurely pace. "Not just in height, but in confidence. They have you to thank for much of that," Gideon said, carrying the basket of food Elena Vasquez had prepared. "Your patience, your encouragement." Faith shook her head. "They were already remarkable children. I've just had the privilege of watching them blossom." They reached the picnic spot, a grassy area shaded by cottonwood trees where the stream widened into a shallow pool. Thomas was already waiting, his trousers rolled to his knees, while Lizzie arranged stones in an elaborate pattern along the bank. The afternoon passed in simple pleasures, eating, playing, discovering early wildflowers and interesting stones. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the landscape, Gideon suggested the children explore a bit further upstream, while he and Faith packed up. "Don't go out of sight," he cautioned. "And Thomas, keep hold of your sister's hand near the water." "Yes, Pa." Thomas agreed, already pulling Lizzie toward a promising bend in the stream. When they were alone, Gideon turned to Faith. "You asked me to wait until spring to ask again." She met his gaze steadily. "I did. It's spring," he said simply. "The world is new again, and my feelings haven't changed." From his pocket, he withdrew the ring box. "Faith James, will you marry me? Will you make our family complete?" Faith looked from the ring to Gideon's face, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've been thinking about this moment for months," she admitted, "wondering what I would say when it came." "And what have you decided?" "That some journeys begin unexpectedly," she said softly. "I came to Texas to fulfill a promise to Sarah, to ensure her children knew their father. I never imagined I would find a home here. A family." She took a deep breath. "Yes, Gideon, I will marry you." Joy surged through him as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. He drew her into his arms, their first kiss as betrothed, tinged with the sweetness of spring and the promise of shared tomorrows. "Pa, Miss Faith, look what we found." Thomas's excited voice broke the moment as he and Lizzie came running back, clutching something between them. "It's a turtle," Lizzie announced proudly. "Can we keep him? Please." Gideon and Faith exchanged amused glances. "What do you think, Miss Faith?" Gideon asked, deliberately using the formal address. Faith knelt to examine the small box turtle. "I think he might be happier here by the stream," she said gently. "But we could visit him whenever we come for a picnic. We have something important to tell you," Gideon added, drawing the children's attention from the turtle. "Miss Faith has agreed to marry me. She's going to be part of our family." The children absorbed this announcement with wide eyes. "Does that mean you'll live with us all the time?" Thomas asked Faith directly. "It does," she confirmed. "If that's all right with you." Thomas nodded seriously. "It's all right. You make good biscuits." Lizzie was more contemplative. "Will you be our new mama?" she asked, her voice small. Faith crouched to meet the girl's eyes. "I will be your stepmother," she explained carefully. "Your mama will always be your mama, Lizzie. No one can ever replace her. But I promise to love you and Thomas with all my heart, to care for you and guide you as best I can." Lizzie considered this, then asked, "Can I still talk about Mama?" "Of course," Faith assured her. "Always. I want to hear about her too." This seemed to satisfy the little girl. She leaned forward to inspect Faith's ring, then announced with the decisive air of a 4-year-old, "It's pretty. You should wear a blue dress for the wedding." Mama always said blue was Pa's favorite color. Gideon blinked rapidly, touched by this evidence of Sarah's continued presence in their lives. "Your mama was right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Blue is my favorite." The wedding took place in June, a simple ceremony in the garden of the Everett Ranch. The children participated fully, Thomas as ring bearer, Lizzie scattering wildflower petals before the bride. Friends from Marfa and neighboring ranches gathered to witness the union, which was followed by a celebration that lasted well into the evening. Faith wore blue, as Lizzie had suggested. Gideon, Seeing her walk toward him through the garden his children had helped plant, felt a completeness he had never imagined possible when Faith James first knocked on his door 18 months earlier. They spoke their vows beneath an arbor Miguel Vasquez had built for the occasion, promising to love and honor each other, to cherish the family they were creating together, and to remember with gratitude the paths that had led them to this moment. As the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Gideon glanced at his children, who watched with solemn happiness from the front row. Then he looked at the woman who was now his wife, whose courage and compassion had transformed all their lives. "Thank you," he whispered as he leaned in to seal their union with a kiss. "For what?" she murmured against his lips. "For reminding me that money can wait," he replied. "But love is the fortune worth investing in." 5 years later, Gideon Everett sat on the expanded porch of his ranch house, watching his family in the yard below. Thomas, now 9, was teaching his 3-year-old brother, Samuel, to throw a lasso, the little boy's attempts bringing peals of laughter from everyone watching. Lizzie, equally grown at 9, sat nearby with Faith, both of them sketching in the afternoon light, while 1-year-old Sarah napped in her mother's lap. The ranch had prospered during these years, though not in the ways Gideon had once envisioned. Instead of endless expansion, he had focused on quality over quantity, breeding better stock, implementing innovative farming techniques, and diversifying with orchards and crops that made the operation more sustainable. The money he had been counting that fateful night had been invested wisely, some in the ranch, some in education funds for the children, some in the town of Marfa itself, which was growing steadily as the railroad brought new opportunities to West Texas. But Gideon's greatest wealth sat before him in the form of his family. Thomas and Lizzie had thrived under the combined love of their father and stepmother. They spoke often and freely of their birth mother, whose memory Faith had helped keep alive through stories, traditions, and the small mementos Sarah had packed in their trunks all those years ago. Samuel and baby Sarah, the children of Gideon and Faith's union, completed the family circle. They would grow up knowing the story of how their family came to be a tale of loss and finding, of separate journeys converging, of love that expanded to embrace them all. As the sun began to set, painting the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Faith came to sit beside Gideon on the porch, little Sarah still sleeping against her shoulder. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" she asked, her free hand finding his. Gideon smiled. "Just counting my blessings," he said, squeezing her fingers gently, "and finding I've lost track of how many there are." Faith leaned against him, warm and solid and real. "Some treasures can't be counted," she reminded him, "only cherished." "The wisest investment I ever made," Gideon agreed, watching as Thomas successfully guided Samuel's small hands through a perfect throw, was putting down those bills and opening the door that night. Together they watched their children play in the golden light of the Texas evening, their laughter carrying on the breeze that rustled through the cottonwood trees. The Everett Ranch, once a lonely outpost of a solitary man's ambitions, had become a home in the truest sense of the word, a place of belonging, of history and future intertwined, of love that would endure long after the money was spent and the cattle gone. For Gideon Everett had learned what truly mattered in this wild, beautiful life. Not the bills he had once counted with such care, but the family that had found him when he least expected it and needed it most. And in that discovery, he had found a richness beyond measure, a wealth that would grow and multiply with each passing year, with each moment shared, with each memory created in the heart of the home they had built together.